Disillusionment. To disappoint someone by making them see the reality and unpleasant truth of something they believed was good. Optical illusions are prime examples. Images of smiling women with hidden faces. Disillusionment can be seen in both of the novels, as well as in many things in society. Parks turn to landfills, amazing inventions with dwindling materials. Macbeth examples include him pretending to be loyal to Duncan, when in reality he murdered him. An example in The Great Gatsby includes the time Nick finally realized that Gatsby wasn't the man that he thought he was. Nick thought that Gatsby was a popular, rich man, but later found out he earned his wealth illegally. With all the parties Gatsby had, Nick thought he had many friends, but in reality, he had few to none. This was shown when no one showed up to Gatsby's funeral. We have only brushed over a few examples of disillusionment in these novels, but we wanted to see what others thought. Vanessa Gallagher, a literature enthusiast, visits a local high school to see what their thoughts and views are on the disillusionment prevalent in these two novels.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Gallagher, and we're here at All Saints Catholic Secondary School to interview a couple students from a local high school about their opinions of disillusionment on Macbeth and The Great Gatsby. Here we are at All Saints Catholic Secondary School interviewing the 2018 Senator. Hi, Austin. What do you think? How would you define disillusionment?
Well, disillusionment is the feeling of wanting something for a long time and having this belief or idea in your head, but coming to the reality that it truly is a disappointment.
And can you think of any scenes or how would you like to relate that to either The Great Gatsby or Macbeth?
Well, in The Great Gatsby, it's really similar to when Gatsby has this idea that Daisy would love him back. When it comes to the reality that Daisy loves money more than she does love him. So that comes to that disappoints him, ultimately leading to his death and downfall.
Very nice, thank you. I am here at All Saints Catholic Secondary School interviewing Ryan Gosling. Ryan, which text do you think more predominantly shows the theme of disillusionment, The Great Gatsby or Macbeth?
I think they're both equal and they're both the same.
So Ryan, can you think of any themes in Macbeth or The Great Gatsby that show the theme of disillusionment?
In Macbeth, Macbeth pretended like he didn't know King Duncan was dead, even though we all know he killed King Duncan.
And Ryan, what about The Great Gatsby?
In The Great Gatsby, Daisy falls in love with Gatsby, and from there, she finds out he's a disillusion to the American dream. Mm-hmm. Because he's a bootlegger and, he doesn't work hard for his wallet.
Thank you very much, Canadian actor Ryan Gosling, for letting us interview you today.
No worries. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Continuing our interviews at All Saints Secondary School, we are interviewing Samantha. So, Sam, how would you define disillusionment?
Well, to me, disillusionment would be, having something appear to be one way, but finding out that in reality it's different.
Okay. And how would you describe the American dream, also in your own words?
I think that the American dream is the idea that anybody can go to the U.S. and achieve freedom and prosperity and success through determination, hard work, and initiative.
Very good. And so how would you say that The Great Gatsby in itself is a disillusionment to the American dream?
Well, talking about the definition I just gave of the American dream, The Great Gatsby doesn't really fit it, since even though Gatsby worked to get his money, he still wasn't seen to be at the same social status as the East Eggers. So in that sense, that is a disillusionment of the American dream.
Okay, thank you. So today I am joined by Katie from All Saints Catholic Secondary School. So Katie, in your opinion, who do you believe portrays a great deal of disillusionment throughout the novel Macbeth?
I would say Lady Macbeth.
And why would you choose her?
because in the beginning of the novel, she was portrayed as a very powerful woman, and she convinced her husband to kill King Duncan. And then towards the end, she ended up taking her life because she couldn't get over the guilt.
Okay, thank you.
Disillusionment can also be defined as taking away an idealism and making it bitter. The Great Gatsby was written in the 1920s. This era was a disillusionment in and of itself, because at first glance, this decade seems like it was filled with partying and it was a fun and exciting time, filled with prosperity and success for all. But in reality, it was a decade of corruption. People lived in the moment and were reckless. They didn't think about tomorrow, they just lived in the today. This was evident in the Great Depression that followed when they were let down from all their previous partying ways. People did not consider the consequences of their actions, and they ended up paying for it. During the interviews of Ryan, Sam, and Austin, they each talked about how disillusionment is portrayed in The Great Gatsby. Austin discussed how Daisy was only ever in love with money and not Gatsby himself.
Oh, Jay, it's so grand.
You like it?
I love it. Oh, it's beautiful.
It's a custom Wurlitzer. I have a man in England who buys me clothes.
I've never seen anything like it.
Sends over a selection at the beginning of each season.
Jay,
These are silk.
Jay,
These are flannel.
they're so beautiful. You'll ruin them. Jay, stop it.
Right here.
No, Jay.
What is it? Daisy, darling, what is it?
It makes me sad.
She only cared about the status and the wealth that was attached to both Tom and Gatsby, which is why at first she wanted to leave Tom, but then she found out that Gatsby wasn't all that he seemed to be and decided to stay with Tom after all. This ultimately led to Gatsby's death because they were both upset. He let Daisy drive, she hit Myrtle, and it was just kind of a chain reaction from there. Sam touched on the subject that the American dream of The Great Gatsby was a disillusionment as well. This is because even though Gatsby worked for his money a little bit, the people will never consider him to be at the same social class and standing as the other East Eggers. This is because he does not come from old money, but he made his money recently, and so he is the sort of nouveau rich. Lastly, Ryan talked about how Daisy finds out that Gatsby is a disillusionment to the American dream himself because he did work for his money a little bit, but it was mainly through the illegal activity of bootlegging that he came to be so wealthy. He puts on this fake appearance and makes himself seem like he is this nice, wealthy man who is so generous and has all these parties, but in reality, he was only doing it to attract Daisy, and he's not the person that he seems to be, and everyone, including Nick, is let down by this. Also in The Great Gatsby, Nick realizes that the American dream is a disillusionment in and of itself, as we have already previously mentioned. He believes that the American dream is a disillusionment because instead of bringing the success and happiness that most people believed and it is supposed to bring, it actually brought moral corruption throughout this era, as many people were too reckless. Jordan Baker also is a character that shows disillusionment throughout the novel. She starts out being this nice, kind person towards Nick, and we have hopes about their future relationship. However, we find out that she lies frequently. She's cheated in golf tournaments before, and she ends up hating Nick. And Nick was let down by her, and she was let down by Nick, because in the end of the novel, she says to him that he's just as bad as everyone else, and he's not the honest man she once believed he was. Finally, Myrtle. Myrtle is a disillusionment as well. She is a disillusionment because through her outings with Tom, she believed that she could become this rich person
Can we get the dog for the apartment?
Whatever you want.
by putting on this facade when she was with him and by acting like she had money. However, this just made her seem even worse. It made her seem like cheap and like she was trying too hard to fit in with the rich people. She pretended to have money and she pretended like she had this higher social standings than others and actually put down the poor people when she was with Tom and with these other East Eggers, when in reality, she was one of the poor people. Finally, in Katie and Ryan's interviews, they both discussed how disillusionment was shown in the novel of Macbeth. Ryan explained that the time where Macbeth pretended to be shocked and upset by King Duncan's death, when we knew that, in reality, he had killed him. Banquo and Macduff showed up early in the morning and they were asking questions, and Macbeth played it off, pretended to be totally fine with the situation, and acted like a typical loyal servant should have. This was kind of a disillusionment because we believed from the start that Macbeth would be a good character. We believed that his wife would not be able to convince him to do these horrible things because he should have been loyal. He always had been up until that point. Another disillusionment in Macbeth is discussed in Katie's interview. She discussed how Lady Macbeth was a disillusionment as well. In the beginning of the novel, she seemed to be a strong and powerful woman who was able to convince her husband to do all these horrible deeds for her benefit. She wanted him to be king, and she was able to convince him to do these bad things to the people he actually really cared about, and so we believed that she was a strong-willed person. However, later in the novel, it is revealed that she begins seeing blood on her hands, she is having constant nightmares and things, mainly surrounding the death of Banquo, but also including King Duncan. This shows, after all, that she is actually a weak-willed person. She could not handle the guilt, and her conscience was weighing too heavily on her. She ends up killing herself near the end of the novel, which finally proves that she is also a disillusionment.
As proven by the interviews and the clips, disillusionment is a dominant theme in both The Great Gatsby and Macbeth. It has contributed to the plot of both novels in major ways and has helped develop characters. After analyzing both of the novels, we've come to the conclusion that nothing is ever as it seems, and the higher the expectations, the more disappointment you'll feel when you find out the harsh reality.